Fellas, hypothetical situation. You wake up tomorrow morning inside a damp concrete bunker. Your pockets contain 3 screws, half a sausage, a bandage, and a weapon that looks like it was assembled during a power cut by somebody with unresolved childhood trauma. A reasonably normal looking man informs you that you're now officially a stalker. You ask him what that means. He ignores you, then immediately sends you outside to investigate supernatural garbage, glowing death bubbles, angry wildlife, heavily armed strangers, and players with usernames that make you question whether humanity was a mistake. At this point, most people would leave. Unfortunately, I had already eaten the sausage. So today, we are exploring Stalzone, a free-to-play extraction shooter MMO set inside a living open-world version of the Chernobyl zone, where anomalies distort reality, factions fight for territory, and every walk through a swamp has the potential to become either profitable, radioactive, or deeply embarrassing. Now, this video is sponsored by Stalzone, and the aim today is simple. We are going to experience my first proper few days in the zone, learning the tutorial, choosing a faction, understanding gear, doing quests, exploring the open world, getting into PvP, and trying not to lose everything I picked up, and hopefully ending the video with enough equipment to stop looking like a man who steals copper wiring from abandoned sheds for sport. And right now is actually a very good time to jump in, because Stalzone has a welcome bonus available through my link in the description, along with the Great Zone Rush event, running right now on North American and EU servers, which is designed specifically to help new players get started with extra rewards. Now, what is Stalzone? The easiest way I can describe Stalzone is this. It is the only extraction shooter that plays like an MMO, and the only MMO that plays like an extraction shooter, which sounds like marketing language until you actually play it, because normally in extraction shooters, dying means you lose your soul, your gear, your confidence, and roughly 40 minutes of your life. But in Stalzone, death works differently. You do not lose the gear already in your inventory. Your weapons, armor, equipment, all that stays with you. What you risk losing is the stuff you found while out in the open world. So every time you leave base, you are gambling with whatever you pick up out there. Artifacts, trophies, materials, quest items, random bits of suspicious swamp metal, all the beautiful trash that makes the zone economy function. This gives the game a very different feeling. You are still tense, you are still watching corners, you are still deeply suspicious of every bush, but one mistake does not erase your entire existence. It just means the zone takes back whatever you were greedy enough to carry, which honestly is fair, because I was carrying enough scrap to qualify as a mobile recycling center sometimes. Before we get deeper into the gameplay, we need to talk about the art style, because Stalzone has this very specific visual identity. The world itself is pseudo-realistic, the weapons are grounded, detailed, and genuinely gorgeous, but the characters have these deliberately stylized, angular faces that somehow make the whole world feel even more distinctive. Every now and then, somebody walks past looking like they French kissed an anvil that somebody threw off the Empire State Building. And honestly, it works. Everybody looks weathered, exhausted, like they've survived the last decade surviving off canned meat, excessive vodka abuse, and radiated steroids. The stylized characters stand out just enough without ever feeling out of place amongst the more grounded environments. And after about 20 minutes, your brain just kinda accepts it as part of the zone's identity. Mostly because I had bigger problems, like finding food, avoiding anomalies, and trying not to get emotionally dominated by somebody with a username that would almost certainly get rejected by an HR department. So after creating my character, I had to choose a side, and naturally, I chose the Stalkers. Not because I had carefully studied the lore, not because I understood the faction dynamics, not because I had any meaningful ideological connection to them. I picked them because the game asked me to choose, and I was already kind of overwhelmed. Now, the tutorial does a solid job of teaching the basics: how to move, how to shoot, how to loot, how to talk to NPCs, how to interact with anomalies, and how to complete early objectives. And most importantly, how to survive just long enough to realize you still have absolutely no idea what you are doing. Now, the sponsor brief specifically asked that the tutorial footage not take longer than 1 minute, which is good, because I don't think anybody wants to watch me spend 8 minutes learning the basics. So in short, tutorial complete, betrayal and trauma administered, I was now officially ready for the zone. Which is a generous way of saying I had a gun, several questions, and the survival instincts of an unattended toddler near an electrical socket. Once you reach a proper safe zone, Stalzone starts feeling much more like a living MMO. Players are running around everywhere, people checking storage, crafting, trading, showing off equipment, grouping up,
standing silently in corners like they have seen things no human mind should comprehend.
And one thing I quickly learned is that gear status is absolutely real, because the more dripped out someone is, the more insane the poorer starting players become around them. You will see a man wearing high tier armor stroll through base and immediately attract a small crowd of freshly spawned peasants staring at him like he is a religious figure, following him around, inspecting him, admiring the fit, gushing over his equipment, and I'm barely certain I saw one of them sniff his armpit. The man isn't even speaking, he's just standing there in expensive gear while 4 new players orbit around him like medieval villagers seeing electricity for the first time. And honestly, I get it, because early on,
your entire identity is poverty.
You look like you fell into a surplus bin and crawled out holding a rusty firearm. So when a geared player walks past looking like a walking weapons platform, it does something to your brain. You don't want to be him, you want to become worthy of standing near him. Now, one of the most important things to understand about Stalzone is that progression does not work like a traditional MMO.
There's no normal leveling system where your character gains bigger stats
because you completed 14 errands for a man standing beside a barrel. Instead, your progression comes from gear, weapons, armor, attachments, equipment, tools. Your character does not become powerful because a number next to your name increased. You become powerful because your gear improved, which means the entire game evolves around building yourself up through crafting, barter, trading, and questing, and actually learning how the world works. This also means the game avoids one of the worst problems in MMOs, the feeling that you're just grinding numbers for the sake of grinding numbers. Here, when you upgrade a weapon or get better armor, you feel it. Your equipment changes how you play.
Your protection changes where you can go.
Your weapon changes what fights you can take, and your confidence changes how stupid you become, which is dangerous, because confidence in Stalzone is usually followed by you sprinting into a swamp and discovering 3 new ways to regret being alive. From here, the game begins feeding you quests, and I mean a lot of quests. At first it seems simple enough: speak to this person, go here, find this item, talk to that person, investigate this place. Then suddenly you 5 errands deep, knee deep in radioactive puddles, trying to track down a shaman because some bloke back at base told you it was important, which is very MMO, but it works here because the quests constantly push you deeper into the world. You're not just running between menu markers, you're moving through dangerous territory, past anomalies, through open spaces, into enemy territory, through mutant infested areas, and occasionally into places where the atmosphere changes from nice walk through nature to I am no longer comfortable with the concept of being outside. The story campaign has over 50 hours of gameplay with non-linear dialogue and cinematic missions, and you can already feel that even in these opening hours, because although this video is very much my first few days learning the ropes, the game immediately starts building that larger mystery. The zone isn't just a map, it feels like somewhere people actually live, somewhere people argue over, somewhere people risk everything for, and somewhere a suspicious old man will happily send you into a flooded radioactive death trap for approximately 120 in-game currency and a used bandage. The world is probably one of Stalzone's biggest strengths, because it doesn't feel like a collection of extraction maps stitched together. It feels persistent, bases feel lived in, routes matter, faction territory matters. You slowly begin learning which paths are safer, which places are contested, which areas contain useful resources, and which routes are almost guaranteed to end with somebody introducing several rounds of ammunition into your general direction. The game also has a really nice rhythm between peace and absolute panic. 1 minute you're quietly wandering through beautiful atmospheric landscapes, listening to the ambience, admiring the lighting, thinking, this is actually quite relaxing. Then 30 seconds later, something is screaming. Your Geiger counter is making noises your doctor wouldn't approve of. Your backpack is full of suspicious garbage, and you're trying to decide whether the thing moving in the distance is a mutant or just Steve. Either way, I'm leaving. The zone has calm moments, but it never feels safe.
And that's exactly why it works. While you're exploring, you will eventually encounter anomalies.
And these are basically the zone's way of politely informing you don't stand there. Some distort space, some launch you across the map, some slowly cook you alive, some make reality itself look like it's buffering. And naturally, because this is a video game, you're encouraged to walk directly towards towards these horrific supernatural death traps, because that's where the valuable artifacts are. Artifacts can be sold, collected, used, or simply hoarded like some kind of radioactive goblin. And this is where the extraction mechanics really begin to shine, because every single valuable thing you pick up out in the zone makes getting home feel just that little bit more important. Suddenly your backpack matters. Suddenly every player becomes suspicious. Suddenly every bush develops malicious intent. And suddenly you begin walking like a man attempting to smuggle stolen jewelry through airport security. Eventually, one of my quests required me to defeat a player from the opposing faction. Now, because this is a sponsored video, I'm going to describe what happened in the most respectful way possible. I followed a man for approximately 20 minutes, not aggressively, not violently, just observing, like an unusually committed nature documentary narrator. Eventually, he wandered into an abandoned house and appeared to go AFK, a catastrophic error in judgment, because while he believed he had finally found somewhere safe, I had already emotionally committed to this encounter. So I quietly crept through an open window, raised my rifle, introduced approximately one magazine of 5.45 ammunition to his personal space, collected my quest completion, collected his loot, and quietly left. Now in most games, I'd probably feel guilty, but in Stalzone, it's simply ecology. Sometimes you're the mysterious survivor emerging from the mist, sometimes you're the bloke checking your inventory indoors before a swamp goblin materializes behind you carrying an assault rifle. Unfortunately, that first victory activated something deeply unhealthy inside my brain. The zone had given me one tiny taste of success, and immediately my body started producing chemicals normally reserved for casino addicts and apex predators, which is how I found my second opponent, standing chest high in swamp water trying to reload. Completely unaware, completely vulnerable. Metaphorical trousers around his ankles. And before my conscience had even finished filling the paperwork, I had already opened fired. Second fight won, second backpack acquired, and it was at that moment I realized something very important. I was no longer learning the ropes. I had become the metaphorical rope. Now, this is where I should probably explain one of Stalzone's most important mechanics, because unlike a lot of extraction shooters, dying isn't the end of the world.
Your demise.
When you get dropped out in the zone, you don't lose your equipped gear. Your rifle, your armor, your equipment, they all stay with you. What you do risk losing is of everything you've founded while exploring. Artifacts, mutant trophies, crafting materials, quest items, all the lovely radioactive rubbish you've spent the last hour and a half stuffing into your backpack, which creates a really nice risk versus reward system. The more valuable things you find, the greedier you become. The greedier you become, the worse your decision making gets. And eventually, you convince yourself that taking one tiny shortcut through an anomaly field is a perfectly reasonable idea. It wasn't. It never is. Eventually though, the zone decided I've had enough fun. It was time to remind me exactly where I was. I found myself inside a watchtower, trading shots with several bandits, feeling very confident, far too confident should I say, which as we've already established is normally the first stage of a catastrophic life decision. I took too much damage, collapsed on the floor, and started bleeding out. Now normally this would be the dramatic end. Cut cue the sad violin, roll credits. Except I then realized I could still punch, which meant my final moments weren't spent reflecting on my poor decisions. They were spent crawling around on the floor, swinging wildly at people's shins like some kind of bloodthirsty cripple that absolutely refused to accept defeat. I was laughing so hard, I almost forgot I was dying. There's something incredibly funny about watching your character slowly bleed to death, while still trying to settle unfinished business through sheer spite. Did it save me? No, absolutely not. But morally, I considered it a victory. Something else I really appreciated was the matchmaking, because Stalzone doesn't simply throw fresh players against people who've been living inside the zone since electricity was invented. The game actually tries matching players with others around the similar gear level, which keeps things surprisingly fair. Now, obviously, better gear still matters, but it isn't everything, because better gear also means better opponents. Progress too quickly, and congratulations, you've successfully upgraded yourself into a brand new category of problems. Success here still comes down to experience, positioning, game knowledge, understanding the world, and occasionally remembering that standing completely motionless in the middle of an open field is generally considered a poor survival strategy. Although I spent most of my first few days wandering around like a confused radioactive pigeon, Stalzone definitely shines when you start playing with other people. You can group up, run expeditions, take part in raids, push through dangerous territory together, and generally reduce the chances of becoming tomorrow's missing persons report, because the atmosphere completely changes playing solo. Every single gunshot sounds like it's aimed directly at you. every bush contains a potential murderer, every noise makes you instinctively crouch. But the moment you've got a few teammates, everyone suddenly develops a main character syndrome. You move in together, covering each other, sharing resources, calling out enemies, feeling invincible, until somebody accidentally walks into an anomaly and immediately reminds everyone that confidence is still not bulletproof. Now, let's talk about the progression systems, because this is where Stalzone really sinks its claws into your brain. Weapons can be customized, attachments actually matter, armor upgrades matter, the barter tree becomes your new religion, and before long, you'll find yourself opening menus just to stare at future equipment you can't afford yet. You start planning routes around crafting materials, making shopping lists, learning exactly where enemies drop which resources, and becoming emotionally attached to what is, objectively speaking, a rusty spring. Because apparently you need 17 of them. This is how the game gets you at first. You're just casually exploring, then suddenly you're planning your week around obtaining 6 more pieces of scrap metal and one suspiciously glowing washing machine component. The grind stops feeling like grinding because now it's personal. There's also an in-game auction, which is something I ended up spending a surprising amount of time looking through. Everything is bought using in-game currency, which you earn by actually playing, finding artifacts, collecting trophies, completing quests, hunting mutants, selling useful materials, basically being productive. The economy feels genuinely alive, prices fluctuate, items have different values, you're constantly deciding whether to keep something or sell it, and before long, you'll discover somebody attempting to sell a slightly used piece of junk for enough money to purchase a detached house, which is exactly how every MMO economy eventually evolves. One bloke trying to become a millionaire, selling literal rubbish. I respect it. It's also worth mentioning that Stalzone's monetization is genuinely pretty fair. It's free to play, but the focus is on cosmetics and optional progression support, not simply buying power. Everything can still be earned by playing, even premium. Skins and boosters can eventually be obtained through the player-driven marketplace, which is nice, because if I'm voluntarily crawling through radioactive swamps for 40 minutes, I'd rather not lose to somebody whose greatest achievement was owning a debit card. By the end of the first couple of days in Stalzone, I was already starting to feel the progression. Better gear, better weapons, more knowledge, more confidence, and significantly poorer inventory management. I'd started this adventure wandering around with a battered Makarov, a backpack full of absolute rubbish, and the navigational awareness of a concussed pigeon. But after hours of quests, wandering through anomalies, getting lost, getting shot at, finding Shaman, and slowly understanding how everything fit together, things finally started clicking. I was working towards higher tier loot, planning weapon upgrades, actually recognizing landmarks, completing longer quest chains, and slowly becoming the exact kind of player I used to follow around safe zones like an overexcited Labrador. Because that's really where the progression shines. Nothing is simply handed to you. Every new weapon, every armor upgrade, every successful trip into the zone feels earned. You remember what it was like being poor. You remember hiding from everything. You remember celebrating because you finally found one crafting material you desperately needed. Then eventually, you're the one walking back into base with noticeably better gear. And suddenly, you've got 4 fresh players following you around inspecting your equipment like you've just descended from the heavens carrying the 10 commandments. The cycle of drip continues. Eventually, the quest line starts opening up even more. You begin traveling further north, meeting new people, making new enemies, questioning the sanity of almost everyone you speak to. Hell, you might even end up bludgeoning several mutant dogs to death with a shovel,
And you might become a drug dealer.
perfectly legally, of course, and eventually you'll stumble across poor old Lyndon, tied up on his knees, patiently waiting for his execution. Now, he claims he remembers me. I'll be honest, by this point I had spent so much time sprinting backwards and forwards across the zone, my memory had completely dissolved, although that may have also had something to do with the industrial quantities of radiation I'd absorbed, or my diet considering almost entirely of rye bread, canned meat, and suspicious sausage. The game gives you the option to shoot your way out of this situation, but my thought process was surprisingly simple. If you're stupid enough to get captured, you're probably not ideal companion material. Besides, this other bloke had significantly better drip anyway, and looked substantially less like he was surviving exclusively on radiated ketamine. We sided with jaundice, which is honestly an incredible name considering it's literally a medical condition. And just like that, I'd somehow found myself joining the orderlies, whose entire objective is essentially to rid the zone of radioactive mutant filth, and finally put an end to the increasingly deranged cult surrounding the Blessed, which, I'll admit, was an occupation I could get behind. Professional mutant exterminator. It has a nice ring to it. We'd quickly reported back to Shaman, although if I'm being honest, the story had become a little hazy by this point. Somewhere between the excessive running, the canned food, the rye bread, and approximately 14 kilos of sausage, my brain had entered a permanent food coma. Anyway, Shaman, recognizing my impressive commitment to poor dietary decisions, rewarded me by forcing me to drink what I could only assume was a cocktail made from radiated mushrooms, questionable herbs, and enough steroids to tranquilize a rhinoceros. Needless to say, things got weird. Well, that was only my first few days in Stalzone, and somehow I already feel like I've barely scratched the surface. If you're thinking about jumping in yourself, this is honestly one of the best times to do it, because the Great Zone Rush event is currently happening on North American and EU servers, specifically designed to make the early game more rewarding and help new players settle into the zone. And if you use my link in the description, you will also be able to claim a welcome bonus, which includes the Ranger outfit and the Cult Walker revolver, along with a bunch of other useful starter rewards that will make your first few hours considerably easier. Just make sure you download the game using my referral link, then redeem the welcome bonus code, because if you ignore both of those instructions, then appear in my comments asking where your free stuff went, I'm legally obligated to pretend we've never met. Anyway, that was my first few days inside Stalzone, a free-to-play extraction shooter MMO where the world actually feels alive, where progression comes from improving your equipment instead of simply watching numbers go up, and where every trip into the zone somehow turns into a story worth telling. I chose the Stalkers, learned the ropes, completed quests, tracked down shaman, explore anomalies, upgrade my equipment, discovered the player economy, won my first PvP encounters, experienced my first very deserved death, and spent my final moments beating people around the ankles while bleeding out on the floor, which, looking back, probably wasn't my proudest moment, but it was certainly memorable. Well, that's really what I like most about Stalzone. Every expedition feels different. Sometimes you come home richer, sometimes you come home empty-handed. Sometimes you finally get that one crafting material you've needed for hours, and sometimes you accidentally spend 20 minutes stalking somebody through the wilderness because a quest told you to. And sometimes you accidentally walk into the same anomaly you just saw someone else die right in front of you, but you thought you could beat it. One way or another, the zone always gives you a story. So a huge thank you to Stalzone for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to try it yourself, don't forget to use my referral link below, claim your welcome bonus, and check out the Great Zone Rush event if you're starting on the North American or EU servers. As for me, I'm still out here, hunting mutants, living almost entirely off suspicious slices of sausage,
taking frequent baths in radioactive swamp water,
and slowly descending into the sort of swamp-dwelling lunatic people
tell fresh players not to make eye contact with.
Thank you all very much for watching, and a huge thank you to this month's patrons for making videos like this possible. And I'll see you all in the next video.